Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're decoding an ancient text that completely revolutionized how humanity understands the mind. We are looking at the Cūḻaniddesa. This is the 22nd volume of the foundational Buddhist scriptures, the Suttanta Piṭaka. Now, for centuries, a lot of folks looked at this text and thought, oh, it's just a simple commentary. But recent analysis reveals something far, far more profound. It's actually an intellectual monument. It was a major turning point in Buddhist philosophy. Imagine taking this beautiful, almost cryptic ancient oral poetry and just transforming it into a rigorous psychological science. That is exactly what this text did. And today, we're going to break down how this ancient blueprint is still shaping our understanding of the human mind.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with the Buddhist intellectual revolution, move into the science of analysis, look at rethinking the great man, explore epistemology and asking questions, and finally, take it from ancient text to today. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Buddhist intellectual revolution. This is all about the shift from poetry to science. So, this text is attributed to the great intellectual pioneer and Kama commander Sariputta. And it wasn't just some dry academic commentary. It was literally the ultimate code breaker. Think about it. Before this came along, teachings were largely oral poetry. They were beautiful, they were memorable, for sure, but they were also open to incredibly wide interpretation. The Cūḻaniddesa stepped in and basically transformed that vague oral tradition into a highly precise analytical science. It essentially laid the absolute groundwork for what would later become the Abhidhamma system, which is this massive, complex Buddhist psychology. It took poetic metaphors and turned them into a structured science of reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, the science of analysis. Let's see how they developed what is essentially a hacker's code for the mind.
Check out how their methodology actually works. It breaks down into 3 distinct, highly logical steps. First, you have Odessa, which is just presenting the core topic or the verse. Second is Niddesa. This is where it gets rigorous. They precisely defined every single term, no ambiguity allowed whatsoever. And third, Patiniddesa, where they hacked into the deepest layers of psychological truth and practical application. So they weren't just passively reading a poem, they were dissecting it, linguistically, philosophically, psychologically. They were extracting the raw data of how the human mind actually functions. And this right here perfectly illustrates the radical contrast of the text and how it literally changed society. In the ancient Indian context, there was this deeply ingrained, frankly terrifying orthodox Brahminical belief in magical curses. You'd have a curse that says something like, "May your head split into 7 pieces." Well, the Cūḻaniddesa took that exact word, head, and completely dismantled its magical, superstitious power. It completely redefined the head as simply being ignorance. Therefore, splitting the head didn't mean you were gonna die by magic. It meant destroying your own ignorance using the sharp weapon of wisdom. It totally empowered the individual and stripped away all that fear of superstition.
Which brings us to Section 3, rethinking the great man. This was a massive, radical societal disruption.
The crucial point here is that they used this text to tear down the rigid caste system of ancient India. In traditional Brahminical thought, a great man, or a Mahaprisa, was determined by birthright, being in a high caste, or having very specific physical characteristics. The Cūḻaniddesa completely threw that out the window. Gone. It stated that true greatness comes solely from a liberated mind, a mind totally free from defilements. This created an incredibly progressive, totally egalitarian intellectual space where literally anyone, no matter their background, had the exact same potential for true greatness. A real game changer.
Let's dive into Section 4, epistemology and asking questions. We're going to look at some core philosophical breakthroughs through conversations with 16 young scholars, known as the Manafas.
I want you to imagine you are the scholar Ajita. You're standing right before the Buddha, and you ask this deeply profound, heavy question about the nature of our reality. What is it that covers the world? What actually surrounds us? It's just a huge, fundamental question about human existence.
And the answer decoded in the text is just striking. It says our world is completely covered, obscured, by ignorance, and it is smeared by craving. So we're essentially just walking around in the dark, sticky with desire. But importantly, it doesn't leave us stranded there. It defines wisdom as this incredible multi-tool. It's the light that illuminates the dark, it's the weapon that cuts right through that sticky craving, and it's the high castle that elevates us way above all the anxieties of worldly conditions. The text also lays out a really brilliant framework for epistemology, the actual study of how we know what we know. And it does this through another scholar, Metabu. It categorizes questioning into three very distinct levels: asking to seek completely new knowledge, asking to compare and test your current understanding, and asking to surgically cut through any lingering doubt. This proves that early Buddhism was not about blind faith at all. It offered this incredibly open, democratic space for rigorous intellectual inquiry. So let me ask you, are you stubbornly holding on to your own opinions right now? Because as another scholar, Tissa Mateo, learned, our own opinions can actually be our biggest trap. The text breaks down the sheer danger of clinging to extreme views, like believing the universe is entirely eternal, or on the flip side that everything just ends in absolute annihilation. The Cūḻaniddesa points out that true liberation means letting go of all of those extreme views. Actually, scratch that, it means reaching a state where you don't even cling to your own most cherished intellectual beliefs.
Take a moment to just absorb this incredibly visceral, poetic metaphor from the scholar Peña. He looked at the painful, unavoidable reality of human aging, disease, and suffering, and he described the whole human condition simply as struggling in the mud. It's an image we can all instantly relate to, right? Especially when life gets overwhelmingly difficult. But the Cūḻaniddesa systematically dissects this imagery for us. It explains that this mud isn't just a metaphor for, having a bad day. The mud is explicitly defined as sensuality, endless craving, and that terrifying, paralyzing fear of what the world is going to throw at us next: loss, pain, blame. We are all essentially drowning in modern anxieties, and this text maps out exactly what that mud is made of, so we can finally figure out how to wash it off.
Then we get this super striking sociological ideal presented in the analysis of the Kāggavesana Sutta. The text advocates living like a rhinoceros horn. Now, what does that mean? Well, a rhinoceros horn is solitary. It stands completely alone. It's an argument for cutting ties with worldly violence, entanglement, and fear, and instead advocating for a solitary, totally unattached focus. It's all about cultivating such immense inner strength that you can stand entirely independent of society's chaos and achieve ultimate freedom. Finally, let's hit section 5, from ancient text to today. Let's look at the Vipassana connection. We need to talk about why this ancient, code-breaking manual still desperately matters to your life today. Because it wasn't just theory for monks, it's a practical tool. This text is the direct blueprint for modern Vipassana meditation. The Cūḻaniddesa explicitly connects to the 37 requisites of enlightenment. It intricately maps out concepts you might actually recognize, like satipatthana, which is mindfulness, the spiritual faculties, and the Noble Eightfold Path. It provides the exact mechanisms and analytical tools you need to cleanse the mind, destroy those defilements, and extinguish suffering right now, literally sitting in your living room. You can clearly see the timeline here. This intellectual monument protected the purity of these teachings over centuries. It evolved from spoken poetry in the early suttas, was analytically decoded by the Cūḻaniddesa, further expanded by scholars like Upasena in the Suttanta Piṭaka, and ultimately became the unshakable foundation of the modern academic and vipassana meditative practices we use all over the world today. It protected the teachings by making them undeniably clear. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought straight from the ancient scholars themselves. We've seen how they used analysis to turn magic curses into psychological breakthroughs, right? And how they completely redefined human greatness. But the core challenge is still intensely personal. Are you still clinging tightly to your own extreme views and opinions? Are you finally ready to use the weapon of wisdom to break free from the mud of craving and anxiety? The blueprint has been completely decoded for us. The next step is entirely yours.